Hey, I'm Jason, otherwise known as Chessically Inclined, and today I'm going to be talking to you about triangulation. So, what exactly is triangulation? Well, triangulation is a process by which you give your opponent the move by wasting a move, usually by moving in a triangle shape, hence the name. Triangulation usually works if two criteria are fulfilled. One is that you would rather have it be your opponent's move in the initial position, otherwise it's completely useless. And the second is that your opponent must have to repeat moves as well, so you get to the same position again but with your opponent to move. This is often the case in king and pawn endgames where there aren't very many moves available to begin with. Let's move on to our first example. So as you can see here, we're a pawn up and we've got some pretty far advanced pieces, and we would, if at all possible, like to convert this into a win. However, if we just try using traditional methods, it's not really possible. For one thing, your opponent has the opposition, and so if you move back to e4, he'll move to e6 or maybe even c6, just attack your pawns and be annoying. And the second thing is that c6 actually doesn't work, among other things because of king to c8. And now c7 looks promising, but it actually gives black a fortress because you cannot break through after king d7. The only way you might be able to break through is by stalemating him, and that's clearly something you don't want to do. And against anything else, let's say king to d6, black will play king to b8. And next move he's going to take this pawn with a drawn king and pawn endgame. Unless white goes here and we have the same other drawn position we were talking about earlier. So it's clear that white can't just force his way in. Now the question is, how does he get in? Okay, we gotta find a way to make progress. And right now, since it's white's move, we don't have any way to make progress like here. But if it's black's move, it's a different story entirely. So the first criteria of triangulation is fulfilled. It would be better if it was black's move. And now what about the second one? He has to move back and forth. Well, if you stay close to this c6 square and continually threaten to push c6, at some point he's not going to be well positioned to do that. So, okay. Two criteria fulfilled. How exactly do we triangulate here? Well, there are two ways to do it. It doesn't really matter which move you choose. Essentially, you want to keep your king active somewhat, so you go king c4. And your opponent decides that they don't want you to go back into d5. If they play something like king e7, then you can play c6. And you just win, because he can't stop your pawn. So he can't go king e7, and if he goes king d8, we're going to have a similar problem. So let's say he plays king c6, and now you play king d4. It's clear that black's not going to want to play king b5, because king d5, and he has to move away, white will just push his pawns and win. So he's got to play king d7, and after king d5, you have a successful triangulation. Black's forced to move his king somehow. And king e7, c6 just lets the pawn queen. So black can go to d8 or c8. And if he goes to c8, it's important not to get carried away and go king d6, when after king d8, you're going to have to just repeat the whole thing all over again, because c6 runs into king c8. So the goal of this is, right now, is white wants to get his king to d7, so black will be confined to the corner. And to do that, he has to go king to e6. Now king b8, king d7 accomplishes the goal. We'll see what happens there in a minute. And if black goes king d8, then he accomplishes the goal, but it takes a little longer. So now here's the question. Why did you want to go here? Because king a8, king c7? Absolutely not. Because king c7 is stalemate. Instead, you just have to push c6. And now, if I get the pawn to c7, I'll just promote it. And if he plays here, then I can even take it if I want, but it's simpler to go king c7 and promote the pawn with checkmate on the next move. So that's one example of triangulation, but there's a couple others that I'd like to show you. So this is another really important position for endgames, especially for the concept of triangulation. And it's got a similar principle. So white wants to get his king to b6 or promote the pawn. And he can do that by either having the king on d6 and it's his move, or getting the king to b6. But it's not going to work using traditional methods right now. Because if white moves his king to c5, then black will just move his king to c7 and you can't get in. Or white moves king d6, black moves king d8, c7, king c8, and you've got no way forward because king c6 stalemate. So just to show you, white doesn't have any way forward except stalemating. So what if it was black's move? Well, if black plays king d8 now, then king d6, king c8, c7, he'd have to move, and then you can push the pawn through. And if he goes king c7, then king c5, king c5, and you get into b6. So I think it's time to triangulate. King c4. And he goes king d8, because if he goes king c7, white still goes king c5. King d4. Now, if he goes to the e-file, then I just go in this way. So he goes king c8, and white goes king d5. And black has no defense. Because of white's triangulation, he forced the move to black, and black's in Zugzwang, he has no good moves. The game might continue like this. And white now has 2 extra pawns, and he should be able to promote one of them. Alright, so is the concept of triangulation specific to only pawn endgames? Not exactly. Here we have an example in queen and king versus king and rook theory. I believe it's one of the many endgames known as the Philidor position. So white's already made a great deal of progress. He's got his king really active, he's forced the king into the corner, and the rook's in a very unstable position. But in order to win, he should be triangulating. So we'll start things out by, even though there's a slightly faster way to do this, we'll demonstrate the proper triangulation technique here. So it may look like white wins really easily with a move like queen c8 or something, but that's actually not the case, because rook b6, king c7, rook c6 would be stalemate. And the most effective way to win is to make it be this position, but with black to move. Because with black to move, he actually can't avoid losing material in the long term. I mean, try and find a safe square for the rook. Rook to b8, queen to a5, checkmate. Rook to b4, queen to a5 wins the rook. Rook to b3, queen to d4, king b8, queen f4, and no matter what happens, you just lose the rook. Either king a8, queen f4 forks the rook, or king c8, queen f8 is mate. Queen b2, rook b2, queen d4, and rook b1 meets just like queen d4. And you're going to keep on checking with the queen until you can win the rook. So let's make it black's move. We're going to do this like this. First we check. Got the same thing again. Then we check here. Then we go here. And finally, since you can't go rook a7 due to queen h8 mate, we formed a triangle. And now it's black's move. He's got nothing he can do, and the game's not going to last much longer. So, alright, I hope you enjoyed this episode on how to triangulate. It's kind of a confusing concept, but hopefully I cleared things up. If you have any questions about it, please let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.